Welcome to the Psychology World podcast. I'm Connor Whiteley, bringing you psychology news, articles, and other interesting psychology-related articles. Where I can find the podcast notes and more interesting psychology-related things, and you can get your free 8 psychology book box set at connorwhiteley.net. Now let's get on to the show. Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 50 of the Psychology World podcast with me, Connor Whiteley. So it's a big episode today. It's number 50, and the topic of today's episode is on the psychology of coats, which I'm really excited about, and I just love doing this. So hopefully you will too. And it is Friday, the 4th of September 2020, as I record this. So moving on to the psychology news section, we're reading from the British Psychological Society Research Digest, and to be honest, there's not a lot of news this week, but there's still some stuff to report. So, babies' moods can determine how well they remember things they've learned. One of the classic findings in memory research is that we're better at remembering information when we're in a similar context to that in which we learnt it. This was perhaps most famously demonstrated in a 1795 study, which found that people who learned a list of words while scuba diving had better memory of words when again underwater compared to on land. Similarly, those who had learned the list on land were better at remembering it on land. But it's not just the external environment that matters. Our internal state can also provide memory cues. For example, people who were intoxicated when learning information are better at recalling the information when drunk than when sober. And there's also evidence that our recall is better when our mood matches how we felt at learning. But this is a slightly long one, just one more paragraph. Now, a new study published in Child Development has found that the same is true even for babies in their first year of life. The findings have implications for understanding infants' memory and could even help to explain why we can't remember anything from our early years. So this is a really interesting one, as I just think that it goes to show how interesting cognitive psychology can be, and also just how complex memory is. And I also think that it highlights two things. One, how far we've come in memory research, because it shows that we can do amazing findings like this. But I think also shows that for us to fully grasp memory, we also have a long way to go. So I think it's really interesting, and I think this is an amazing finding, and I think that it'd be interesting to see the implications of this studies in the future. Yes, so the last news article is the editor's pick, the psychology of eye contact digested, which is a very important point, because I quickly went into this article and it's really long, and this is just the digested version, so I would honestly hate to know how big the actual version is. So, going back to the editor's pick, many of our relationships begin with that moment when our eyes meet and we realise the other person is looking right at us. Pause for a second and consider the intensity of the situation, the near magical state of two brains simultaneously processing each other, each aware of being at that very instant the centre of the other's mental world. Psychologists have made some surprising discoveries about the way that neutral gaze, or lack of it, affects us mentally and physically, and how we relate to each other. Here we digest the fascinating psychology of eye contact, from tiny baby sensitivity to the hallucination-inducing effects of prolonged eye staring. So this one was actually quite interesting, because as I said, I went into the article in quite a lot of depth, and it was really interesting read. So you could always find this at the British Psychological Society's Research Digest website. I'm sure if you just search it on the internet, you'll be able to find it easily. And it went on to such an interesting range. For example, children to know the power and the importance of eye contact in a social situation, but they take it to the extreme, because at the age of around 3 or 4, children believe if they cover their eyes, then they're invisible to the world. So that I think is really interesting. Yes, that's enough of the psychology news section. Let's move on to the personal update. Moving on to personal update. Thank you everyone for their brilliant and really kind feedback on last week's episode on artificial intelligence. That was an amazing episode, and I absolutely loved it, and I'm so glad that you did too, because the podcast metrics went up, the attract to the website went up, and I want to give a massive thank you to Lawrence, who left this really kind comment on the website, where he said, "Thanking you kindly, Lawrence." And that I think, and that comment, even though it sounds really simple to some who that made my day because it really shows that you all enjoyed it, and I'm so pleased that you found it useful and really interesting. And hopefully you will find big episode 50 really interesting as well because it's on the psychology of coats. Which when I was thinking about it, I was thinking, God, I can't believe I've been doing this for 50 episodes now. But it's great and I love it, and I definitely think I'll definitely keep around till at least episode 100. So you've got me for at least another 50 episodes, hopefully. To be honest, I cannot see myself stopping this for quite a while. Yes, when I realised that this was going to be episode 50, I thought to myself, oh, maybe I should have done the AI episode of like this week because it'd be fun and it'd be a really big landmark episode. But as you know, I started my Kickstarter this week, which I was so excited about. I loved it because, and in case you're tuning in for the first time and this is your first podcast episode with me, so welcome to our little like podcast club. I was about to say, but and as always, I'm so grateful to all of you wonderful listeners. And in case you didn't listen to last week's episode, so I've started this a Kickstarter campaign on Kickstarter, and in short, it's a crowdfunding campaign to help me turn my new fantasy trilogy into hardbacks and paperbacks that are available to libraries, bookstores, and everywhere else that is not Amazon at the moment. Because you can get paperbacks on Amazon, but you can't get my hardbacks anywhere because I don't have hardbacks at the moment. So I absolutely loved putting them together, and it was really exciting to launch it. So it's Friday as I recall this. It's been about officially it's been about 3 days, 6 hours. Yes, I am that sad to count properly, and we are 58% funded. I think it's like some £233, and we need £400 to fund. So I'm so excited. Like, it was like great fun, and I'm just so excited about it. But I will circle back to it in a minute. But something that I wanted to quickly mention is that I know that a lot of you are university students, high school students, college students in general, and then I know that there are workers who also listen to this podcast. And this week, I've actually been doing a lot of student ambassador work for my university. In fact, after this, I actually need to record a training video for them on like student finance. Then, as I'm treasurer of the Baking Society this year, which, as you can imagine, has pretty much been cancelled because how can you bake in a small accommodation kitchen? So that I know, like the university, obviously you can probably like attest to because some of them are tiny. It was just like ridiculous. So we can't social distance. It's been cancelled. But we're probably going to do a Zoom thing, which I think should be quite interesting. Anyway, the entire point of this is just to emphasise that yes, the world's changing, but to be honest, I'm just going like off my head here. I have voted down like I wanted to talk about this, but I didn't actually put. But to be honest, I do just want to highlight that humanity, and yes, we live in quite a dark time with quite a lot of bad stuff happening in the world, but just as a little positive note, I did just want to highlight that humanity is a great, adaptable, and to be honest, quite a brilliant species. Which I forget the quote. I forget the quote from somewhere, but it says something like 50.1% of humans are good, 49.9% of them are bad. So that I think is just quite a really good quote that we just need to remain positive. And yes, the world's changing, but to be honest, it's actually going to be so nice doing Zoom baking societies simply because it does save me the 4-hour commute to uni and back as I'm living at home this year. So that's just something to think about, and a little dose of positivity on your Monday morning. So today's episode has been sponsored by my Kickstarter campaign because the fantasy trilogy ties into today's episode because we are talking about coats and the psychology of coats, and this trilogy actually has a coat as its main villains. So my Kickstarter is actually sponsoring today's episode, which I think is actually quite funny. So there is a link to the Kickstarter campaign in the show notes, and I will be extremely grateful if any of you back it. And as a bonus for my psychology lot, including my email list and this wonderful podcast, if you back it for a minimum of £1 or more, you will get if the campaign funds, you will get the clinical psychology book, which is out on the 1st of October early, and you will get it as a reward for just backing the Kickstarter campaign for £1. So the reason why I love this campaign is because it will help me get my paperback and hardback books into libraries, bookstores, and there are tons of great rewards. And to be honest, I've already had so much positive feedback. I would love for you to become part of this creative project, and I would just love for you to be able to back my project, know that you're a part of this great project. And with the Kickstarter, you can get paperback, hardback, and more exclusive rewards. And if we get into the stretch goals, then you get exclusive short stories. And returning to the more psychology point of view, like not only do you get the clinical psychology book for free, but it's as a reward when you back the Kickstarter for £1 or more. As I'm buying the things in a bulk, if the campaign funds, then I will also be able to turn my psychology books into hardbacks and paperback books, which I know a lot of people have been asking me for hardbacks. And to be honest, I don't blame them because I love hardback non-fiction. So please consider supporting the Kickstarter. There is a link to the Kickstarter campaign on the show notes at connorwhiteley.net/blog, and this should also be in your podcast description. So let's move on to the content part of today's episode. So we're moving on to the content part of today's episode. I love this episode, and so originally today's episode 50 was meant to be on psychological resilience and everything, which I thought was reasonably timely. I was thinking it'd be even more timely next week, simply because more people would be back to school, back to university, and back to work. So that's what's next week's on. Let's move on to the actual topic today: the psychology of coats. So as I read through my scribbled, so we've all been at a party, at work, at school, university, or whatever, at a conference, when we encounter a threat to us. Part they say that they're better than us, and overall we feel threatened by this person because they are better at something than us. And to be honest, to stop ourselves from feeling bad about it, we engage in the self-soothing prejudice. Yeah, for like example, if you were at a psychology conference, or if you were at university, work, or school, and there's someone like came up and said, "Oh, you're rubbish at it, I'm so much better at X, Y, or Z than you," then we are very likely to turn around in our heads, if we're being polite, and say we are so much better than them in a return. For example, like that person might be better at football than me, but I'm better at psychology than them, for like example, if we're using a quick example. And this is known as the self-soothing prejudice, and this helps us to maintain our peace of mind. And this is basically book discounting, so when we completely discount an entire group of people. And it's actually really interesting how this self-soothing bias actually plays into coats, but we'll get on to that in a minute. So this self-soothing bias is completely natural. We all do it, and to be honest, if we didn't do it, there would probably be some quite negative mental health impact as we would be feeling down. But this self-soothing bias allows us to make ourselves feel better and maintain our peace of mind. However, if you use this self-soothing bias constantly and at extreme levels, this can really corrupt you. And if you engage in absolute self-soothing bias, then this will naturally absolutely corrupt you. Sorry, for like example, if we keep buckering ourselves up with the self-soothing prejudice, I've just realised I've said biased, forget I said that, this is prejudice, then you're engaging in absolute self-soothing bias. And the reason why I repeat that is because it's really important, but you can think of this self-soothing prejudice as like a deck of trump cards. Trump cards, like if someone like assaults you, then you can like pretty much grab a card from the deck and trump that answer, because cards that you know that you're better than them for this reason. And let's move on to the actual coat bit. So as you can imagine, this extreme levels of the self-soothing prejudice and constantly using trump cards is toxic to those around you, and this can lead to name calling, like sociopath, psychopath. But most interestingly, this means that you keep pulling out trump cards. Part if someone calls you a psychopath, then you say, "I'm not a psychopath because I know the truth." Or to be honest, to put it much more plainly, I'm not a psychopath, I'm better than you, and I'm the winner and you're the loser. That's, to be honest, could be a really simple trump card. And linking it to coat, all these trump cards come from coats. So now we're going to get into the real topic of today. So all coats give decks to their supporters, and this is actually part of their appeal, apparently. And it's because of these trump cards that people can use to overcome jealous anxiety and the negatives of day-to-day life. This is why people are willing to be brainwashed. And to be honest, one of the most interesting things about this whole topic is that when people join a cult, apparently, of course, I promise you, I'm not speaking from any personal experience, and to be honest, I don't see the appeal. Because you'll be brainwashed and you'll be manipulated, and you won't be your own person. And to me, that's one of my most important things of freedom. And yes, I know there's the psychology debate of there's no such thing as freedom and all that, but I'm trying to remain positive on this podcast. So back to what I was saying. So the interesting thing is that people think that they've gained the truth or whatever nonsense that's like their religious truth, enlightenment, spiritual guidance, or whatever the quote offers. Gives them some superiority. But they don't actually realise that the same trump card that they're using is used by every single coat, so they aren't that special. And that's why some people become coatists, to become special and to feel special. However, these are trump cards actually make the code members that become absolute, infallible, and of course they're not, but it's what the coatists feel like. And all of this self-soothing prejudice gives the coatist or member of the code a fantasy break from the jealous anxiety which we all get. And this is the anxiety and all the emotional turmoil that you get when you're jealous of someone for being better for something than you. And this becomes addictive. And one of the ultimate things about a code is that using these trump cards and using this reason that justifies everything and that makes you infallible becomes more natural than natural thought, which I thought was just so interesting when I read that, because these coatists and members of codes prefer to use the reason, for example, like I'm one of God's chosen, that's why it's right, that's why you can't stop me, moreover than a rational thought, which I thought was really, really interesting. So I hope you've enjoyed today's episode on the psychology of codes. Please check out my Kickstarter to see a coat in action. There's a link on the blog post at connorwhiteley.net/blog, and there's also a link in the podcast description. And also remember that if you support with £1 or more, then you can get the clinical psychology book early and at a much cheaper price than if you buy it when it's out. So have a great day, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to see the show notes, then please go to connorwhiteley.net. And if you want a free 8-book psychology box set, then please go to connorwhiteley.net. Have a great day, and I'll see you next time.